next on the show, we are going to do a little delving deeper. And on this episode of Delving Deeper, we are going this segment of Delving Deeper, we're going to find out why it's not a whole show in itself. But also, we're going to be talking about Ludonarrative Dissonance. That's a mouthful.
It's a mouthful and a half.
It certainly is, and a lot. Now,
I vaguely remember you telling me what this is, but for everybody else at home that also doesn't remember what the hell this is, I would love if you explained.
Certainly. I will do what I can to explain it, but basically, dissonance is like the divide. When you hear people talk about cognitive dissonance, it's similar to that, where like one thing seems to contradict the other. Ludonarrative dissonance is a term that was originally, as far as we can tell, originally brought up by a game designer named Clint Hawking back in like 2007. He had an article that was talking about it in BioShock as an example, which is probably a good place to start. But also Uncharted has been brought up in a lot of other games. But basically, here's the division that comes into play. I am the hero of the story, and I'm the good guy, and I'm there to save the world. But in the meantime, while I'm in the middle of that, I kill so many people. Just like blatantly just shooting everybody whatsoever.
Another example would be Batman, who does not kill people and refuses to kill people, but leaves them grievously injured and probably with severe life-threatening injuries.
Yes. And let's face it, there are people, like if you played the Arkham games, because technically Batman didn't kill anybody in the Arkham games.
Technically.
But, like, when you get to Arkham Knight and you get the Batmobile and you're just shooting off, like, missiles, that non-lethal missiles or whatever, and there's stuff I'm sorry, like, when he bashes somebody's head into a wall, or they just fall down smashes a dumpster or something, I don't think they're getting back up.
No.
In case you're wondering why it's called that, though, it's actually because it's a compound word, ludonarrative, between ludology and narrative. Ludology refers to ludic elements, or gameplay, basically. So these are the actual interactive gameplay elements. Is referred to as ludic elements. Yeah, we learn something every day.
Breaking that word down into 5 different parts.
The more you know. So, ludo, and then narrative. So basically this is the divide between the gameplay and the narrative.
I thought Ludonarrative was just a narrative in the songs by the band Ludo.
That is also accurate, but not the one we're talking about today. But Ludonarrative dissonance is just that. It is when you have something that does not really gel between the gameplay and the narrative that's being told. So Uncharted is a good example of that. I think you'd probably agree that a lot of games that we play probably have this issue in one way or another.
Probably.
Where you're listening to, like, the narrative and the cutscenes are going and they're telling a story, and then you get into the gameplay and it seems to be inferring a very different version of events.
Definitely a lot of games. I can think of 2 right now offhand that don't have that issue, which are Shadow of War / Shadow of Mordor, where you're killing Urukais. That's a little different because there's clear distinction there between what you're doing as being the thing that you're supposed to be doing and not. Right. And then the other one was actually Cyberpunk, because you're kind of doing things for the police in part of it, and cleaning up like gang crimes and stuff. It's a little different, but it's you're not like, oh, I'm the good guy saving the world. It's like, I'm cleaning up Night City.
Yeah, exactly. Cyberpunk really does have the thing where they don't really give you the illusion that you're the good guy anyway. So
no, you're doing a heist. Okay. Anyway, so
yeah, but that does happen. but I've played my fair share of the Uncharted and the Bioshock games, and they do cast you as characters that are maybe in desperate straits, but are supposed to be like the generally good folks that are trying to save things. But then it gets into a little bit of a harder time, and I think it's why Bioshock was the first example that was brought up with this idea. Okay, so when you get down into Rapture, right, you're kind of presented with this very dystopic view of a world apart. Objectivism went way off the rails. And so when you get in there, there's obviously people that are coming at you and trying to kill you, like the Splicers. And you do take them on, and you can kind of understand that. But then you're also given options, like when it comes to the little, the big daddies and the little sisters. And you have the options, even though you're the hero of the story. Do you just want to kill the little sisters so you can harvest their atom and become more powerful? You have that option. Would you like to take it? Like, you start getting some real options about whether you are going to leave people alive or you're just going to simply kill them. And it's just out of the gate. Does not improve in later versions of the series. Uncharted, again. Nathan Drake is supposed to be an explorer. He's trying to find lost treasure. Yeah, he runs across mercenaries that might be trying to kill him, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he has to then go into a place and just start mowing people down all over the place. Lara Croft also occasionally has this problem with Tomb Raider. Exploring lost tombs. Okay.
Archaeologists have a really dangerous profession, apparently.
It really is. It really is. One thing that I liked is, I guess you could say that there's a bit of this, at least a cognitive dissonance in movies as well, like even in like Indiana Jones, because again, he's a professor of archaeology, and now we're in like these scenarios where he just shoots somebody. But one thing I did appreciate about that story is that a lot of times it's just like, He just leans his head back, bumps somebody off of the tank, and then they roll under the tank. It's like, uh-oh, sorry. Whoops. I didn't really do that intentionally. I'm sorry.
Listen, I just need you to know that archaeologists are the people that will solve all of the world's major issues.
This is true. They'll find all of these ancient artifacts that will probably kill us, and then make sure no one ever finds them.
Don't put them in your museum.
It belongs in a museum.
It belongs in a museum.
It certainly does. But way too many of those stories really do revolve around, wow, I found this ancient civilization. Oh, wow, there's an ancient relic. And then the resolution to it is, no one should ever find this ever again. Because this was a mistake. It was a mistake.
On that topic, it's not really the Ludonarrative Dissonance part, but on that one specific thing, I want a follow-up game. A sequel to a game where you find an artifact, realize it should never be touched and found again, and then a follow-up game where someone goes and finds it again.
Yes. Let's do that. Let's absolutely do that. This has been the conversation that's come up with a lot of adventure games. RPGs have a tendency to have this issue, and it's a little hard to justify. Sometimes you get around it by being like more of a high fantasy sort of thing where, okay, the undead are coming at you. What are you gonna do? It's like, what are you gonna do?
I think we actually had a moment of something similar in our D&D game.
Sure.
Where Ray's fighter was like, yeah, I'm just going to shoot the gnome. It's like, okay, but are you going to shoot the gnome?
Yeah.
Was your character, who was trying to help the common folk, shoot this just rock gnome for almost a reason? Yes, it's kind of self-defense, but the other two party members were not shooting at the gnome. They were shooting at the device it was sitting on.
Right.
To destroy that. And she's like, maybe I won't do that.
Yeah. Granted, the end resolution did not work out very well for the gnome.
Granted, the gnome ended up getting eaten by the mimic, so...
The mimic that we didn't find the first time, and the rock gnome that we tied up after incapacitating.
Yes.
With a sleep spell, for the record. Yeah. Whoopsie, but it was not intentional. We did
Unintentionally, food. Anyways.
Yes. But that is actually where we should probably have more of a discussion, because you mentioned that in the D&D game, and this does happen a lot in tabletop, and I think that the term that we typically talk about is murder hobo. This idea.
I don't know if that happens a lot.
Yeah.
It's brought up a lot, but I don't know personally that games people play in generally have that issue as often as it is brought up.
I see. I mean, I have been in some campaigns, maybe more than one, I can't remember, where your heroes end up getting a lot of people killed and the whole town's on fire when you leave. And you kind of have to leave because it's on fire.
Okay, well, I guess it depends on the reason that things go south really fast. And I guess it also would determine, the morality of, like, what your party is doing and who the people that your party is fighting are and what they're doing.
Sure.
It's a lot less clear, I think, in a tabletop game without knowledge of all the sides, so the DM could be the ultimate arbiter for that. But video game, it's a lot more clear that painted as you are the hero in most cases of that. Unless it's a game like you're portrayed as a hero, but it turns out you're not the hero.
Yeah.
That's not as often though, because that's turning a trope on its head.
Sure. Yeah, I'd actually think that it would be really fun, really interesting, if at the end of, like, campaigns, they just, like, had somebody sit down with you and make sure that you didn't actually break a ton of laws and and kill a lot. They actually had that happen in Telltale Games Walking Dead. There was a whole thing where you're playing Lee for the entire game, and you're making some hard choices, like, okay, who's gonna live and who's gonna die, and am I gonna shoot these people, and am I gonna steal this food because it might be somebody's food, we don't know. I had to make some choices. And at the end of those episodes, a guy who's been watching you this entire time, who's been, like, in the shadows watching and observing what you've done, sits you down at a table and questions you about the decisions you made, and you have to justify the actions that you took to him because he has a gun on you. And you have to justify basically that you're still a good person after all of this.
There you go. I like that.
Yeah.
Might be harder with D&D or a tabletop game. I think if you were to, like, give every decision they have, like, mark it down, like, have a list of things they can do, mark down every time they do a certain thing, you could do it, but again, that would be very granular.
You want to have, like, a list of sins and virtues. And, like, every time you do something, it's like, it's like weighing your soul for the end of your life, the weights and measures of your humanity.
Maybe at the end of the game you're visited by an avatar of a god, and depending what virtues you've shown over the course of the game, it depends what avatar visits you.
Or this might really work well for, like, paladins, clerics, or warlocks, anything that has, like, a patron or a god that they answer to, where there might actually be, like, a large spirit or creature that might be asking, hey, are you still on the path that you were supposed to be on? Because you're getting your power through me, bud. So what are you doing? I can understand that as an interesting story beat, because, obviously tabletop games are more narratively driven than, let's say, a video game typically. But I don't know. I think that it's worth considering, especially if it's something like that could actually be observing, or a big brother character kind of doing so, or someone in your party who just wants to be observing. I remember in, what was it? Knights of the Old Republic 2. one of the characters that's around and it can go on your quest and can then also murder a bunch of people with you is Kreia. But Kreia, being this sort of older gray Jedi, essentially, will often, on the ship, discuss decisions that you've made and have you justify them to determine if you've done the right thing, whether you've done the light side or dark side options, whether you've saved somebody or you have cast them out, will make a note to talk to you about that decision and determine, did you think that was the right course of action, and what are the possible ramifications of the thing that you did. Even if, and this was the fun part, even if somebody comes up and says, can I please have some credits? My daughter is dying and I need some credits. And you go, okay, here you go. Here's some credits. She'll come in afterward and go, really? Do you think that was a wise idea? Because I think what you just did is made him a target. For all of the criminals.
I remember that.
Yeah. And then you see the thing and it's like the criminals then, oh, he has money, and then beats him up and takes his credit, and you're like, oh, okay, so, yeah, all of these things that I do have larger ramifications. But it would be harder to justify that you were the good guy if you were just like, no, punch, and then take their money.
Yeah. It's well, that's the great thing about the Gray Jedi in that specific, the gray morality there is that every action has a consequence.
Yes.
So you may think you're doing a good action, but the consequence to that action may be negative.
Yes, it is.
So you do a good thing for someone, but the good thing you do for that person ends up being a negative for them.
Right. And games like Knights of the Old Republic actually try to keep track of that because you have the light-dark mechanic, where things that you do actually influence your character at large. Fable tried to quantify that as well, but I always found, and I remember having these conversations with people with Fable, is that the quantifying of that morality becomes kind of weird. Like, you go out to the bandits and you'll get some good boy points if you kill the bandits. But kill people in town and you'll get the bad boy points. But if you figure it out, like, you start thinking about, if I steal an apple, it's 2 evil points if I steal the apple. If I kill a townsperson, it's 5 evil points. So, if I'm trying to figure this out, killing 2 townspeople is equivalent of stealing 5 apples.
Yeah.
Okay. That also, you're the hero of the story regardless, so
right.
You're either the evil hero or the good hero.
Well, that's one of those things too, where morality systems are really kind of an antiquated part of gaming. Sure. Just like alignment has kind of gone away for D&D for the most part as well. It's really not heavily cared about. For instance, in a lot of game systems, it's the morality system and alignment type systems have just kind of not been favorable as much in recent years.
Yeah. I can kind of, I actually think that when it came to the alignment system in D&D, you know, your chaotic, neutral, lawful, and then like your evil and good or neutral, that whole system, I think the bigger problem, beyond being like generally good, because you kind of figure most of your characters are going to be aligned with good or neutral, not necessarily evil, I think it actually becomes really tricky for characters that might be labeled as the evil characters, because then how do I do anything that might be morally right in the game at all?
I think it also takes away from playing a character to play the character versus playing a character to play in alignment.
Right, because you're no longer asking... I think we've actually talked about this on the last show, but the idea that you essentially are creating a dialogue where I'm no longer thinking about who my character is, but I've determined that my alignment is going to determine who I should be.
Right. Instead of being like, oh, this person cares a lot about this thing and less about this. So maybe they're willing to kill if they can justify the reason they're doing it.
Right.
Or maybe they're willing to steal, but they're stealing to, like, Robin Hood style, steal from the, rich, do a bad thing, but to give to people who need it to do a good thing. So it's complex. It's more complex than just the morality trees and the alignment charts are. I think we've gotten a little bit away from ludonarrative dissonance, however.
We probably have gotten a little far away, although maybe not, because generally the idea of the narrative and the gameplay not adding up, actually this does actually kind of work with that, because
good.
Yeah, don't worry, we actually haven't gotten away from it, because what we're talking about is that the gameplay might not actually align to the storyline itself. So, and that is exactly what the point is. It's not necessarily just about the idea of becoming a murderous, rampaging video game character while talking about how, I need to save a lot of people, but it can also mean really any choices that you can make in gameplay that don't really add up to the story itself, because we have a contradiction between these two things. In general, if you're running a game, or if you're making a game for that matter, do we really need to create a system to justify this, or is this really more of a player experience issue where the player has to write this in their heads?
Yeah, I don't think game systems really need that as like a hard set rule.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Unless you're trying to do something like, hey, we're going to do ludonarrative dissonance, or like specifically call it out, be like, your player's a hero, but they're also going to be the like villain.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't think there's a specific example I can think of for that, so.
Sure. Another thing that is also worth mentioning that a lot of games do when it comes to ludonarrative dissonance, I think, is that you can play characters that are not immortal, but are very much human, and somehow can take so many bullets to the face before you die.
Yeah, that's not ludonarrative dissonance, that's just games.
That's just how games work.
Yep.
But
hell, you jump on Mario's head and he just shrinks.
Yeah! You jump on Mario's head, you jump on the enemies in Mario, and they just lay flat and turn into coins.
Yeah, it's weird how that works.
I don't know.
We should have that happen in D&D.
That would be amazing. Oh,
yeah, you slay the mimic and it just dissolves into a stack of coins.
We could do the Scott Pilgrim thing. We take on our enemies and they just burst into coins at the end.
Yes, exactly.
Let's do that.
Perfect.
Let's do that, folks.